big question here. How did I come up with warrior kids? Alright, this is a big one. In my house, people weren't very happy when I was a child. They were always fighting. My mum and dad were always fighting. My mum would be at one end of the house yelling at my dad. My dad would be at the other end of the house yelling back at him. And they would throw things at each other. And so my house wasn't safe. People were getting hurt. And my mum and dad were very aggressive, and they would use their fists and they would hurt people. And to give you an example, now around my house, my dad thought he could fix things. He thought he was a fix-it man. So when something broke, he would fix it. The lawnmower broke. My dad fixed it. It never worked again. Chainsaw broke. My dad fixed it. It did not work again. So often my dad thought he was pretty good with the tools, but when it came to it, he wasn't so good. Anyway, the biggest thing with him though too was if he, when he wanted to fix something, he would often call me to help him. So he would come in, Tipene, come here. So I would have to go out and help him. Now one day he wanted to fix the lights. Now we had a 2-storied house, and one part of the house was open plan, meaning that you could see all the way up to the roof from the bottom. So he got the big ladder out and he wanted to fix the lights right at the top. So, and they were on the side, on the wall. So my dad, he gets the ladder out, he puts the ladder against the wall, then he climbs up the ladder to fix the lights. My job is to hold the ladder. You holding the ladder? That's me underneath. Now my mum is in the kitchen. She comes out from the kitchen, she looks at my dad at the top of the ladder, and then she looks at me. She looks at my dad. She looks at me. Now, she is behind my dad. He can't see her. My mum starts talking to me and she starts going, I'm holding her. I was thinking, surely she's not saying what I'm thinking she's saying. And she goes, push the ladder. My mum is telling me, she's mouthing at me quietly, to push the ladder over with my dad up the top. There was no way I was going to do that. If I pushed that ladder over, my dad was going to go crashing down, and that's what my mum wanted, of course. He wanted me to push the ladder over. So here's me, my mum saying, push the ladder. My dad's up the top, you holding the ladder? So that's what my family was like, and my mum meant it. She was a pretty angry person, my mum and dad, and they were both hurt when they were young, you see, but they carried it on. They didn't stop it. For me, I didn't want to be like that. I have a 5-year-old boy. He's going to be 6 in February, and I have a little girl. She's going to be 4 soon, and I don't want them to be scared of me. I was petrified of my parents. When I got to school in the mornings, I loved school because it was safe. I found school hard though. I didn't do well at school. I didn't do well at school at all. I asked about maths before. Maths was my worst subject. I found school hard because it was hard to think about maths and that when at home it was a war zone. Because it was. There was lots of drink, there was drugs, and there was lots of fighting. And that was my home. And it was a scary place. You know, when the family all came round, when the whānau all got together and there was a party, I was often under the table, because what would happen is the aunties and that would all sit around the table and play cards. And I would get underneath the table and just muck around there with some toys or something because it was safer there. Because once the alcohol got going and people started getting loud, then the fists would come out and it was all on. So for me at home it was a pretty scary place. I mean, and so this is why I started Warrior Kids. The big thing for me was like I said, I didn't want my children to be scared. I don't want anybody to be scared of me. I don't want anybody to be scared. I knew what that was like when I was a kid. I never felt safe. I was always scared. I'd hate to think any of you know what that's like. But some of you might have an idea of what that's like, and that's not nice. You know, I think personally adults should be very careful with their children and look after them. because, you know, you guys are all precious and you should be looked after. You should have a good life. And so for me, I'm giving that to my children. My children, get this, they have never been smacked. Not even a little bit. They've never been smacked. Now that's, you know, that's, and they have no idea what that's like. For me, it wasn't a smack, it was a punch. You know, my dad used to pick me up when I was like this big. My son's taller than me now. I remember seeing him when he got to that height, and I thought, man, that's when my dad was throwing me around. And my dad would pick me up, throw me against the wall. You know, and hate was in his eyes. That was the biggest thing. And even when it was dark, the lights were all turned off. Because my dad would get really angry, you see. What he would do is he'd grab a chair, he'd put it in front of the window, and he'd sit on this chair, and he'd sit there like this. All the lights in the house would be off. And he'd sit there staring out, watching the road. He was waiting for my mum to come home. My mum never came home. My mum was a party girl. She was off out at all the parties. So my dad would sit there and he'd be staring out and he'd get himself angry. You know, you could see him like thinking and he'd get angry and angrier. And then he'd come looking for me and hit me. I hadn't done anything wrong. He was just angry. He was furious. There was a time I did run away when I was early in my teens. But you got to understand, you want your mum and dad to love you. And I wanted my mum and dad to love me. And so I stayed there because I wanted them to love me, and I kept trying to get them to love me. I felt like they didn't love me, and I felt like I had to keep trying, so I stayed there and kept trying to get that. It took me years as a man to stop chasing them.
Did they ever love you?
No. And they're not good people. Which is interesting, eh? Like warrior kids. I come in and do warrior kids, and because I don't tell everybody all this stuff, you know, I keep it pretty quiet. But anyway, in warrior kids one day, I had this grading. So I had this, and what that meant was, it was determining whether or not each child had passed their time at warrior kids. So this boy, he's standing in front of me. He's standing there. And he's thinking it's pretty cool, you know, all his mates watching him, I'm standing and I'm looking at him, as Papa Tim does. And I said to him, you know, I talked to him about his behaviour. And I said, you're not making very good choices. You know, you're not making changes that you need to in order to get rewarded and get the good things from life, get the good things from school. And he's there, well, what do you know? My dad's in prison. You know, and he's standing there, and I was able to step forward a little bit and look at him and said, my dad's been in prison the most of his life. And this boy's like, oh. And I said, yes, but I'm not going to be like my dad. I don't want the police coming to my house. I don't want to go to prison. I want a good life. And so then I said to that boy, and I want you to have a good life too. You know, we have a choice. Hey, you all have a choice about who you're going to be. You're going to be parents one day. You're going to have children. How are you going to be as a parent? Oh yes, my dear, you might have children one day. And you might have a partner, husband, wife, and you're going to be, how are you going to be to that person? Well, you know, I mean, look at my family. My mum and dad were at war. They were at each other all the time. Now, I don't want that in my life. I don't want my children to be around that stuff. And the thing is, you know, with relationships, girlfriend, boyfriend, all that stuff, you learn about relationships from your parents. You learn about relationship from your parents. That's how you learn about it. So you watch your mum and dad, you see how they are together, you know, and if they're good, then that means there's a good chance later on that you're going to have a good connection with somebody. If they're not so good, that means you might have to work at it a bit harder than others. But you guys are all good. I'm sure you